Okay, we're on. You're live yet? Cool. Okay, no problem. So good evening and welcome to the third session of Let's Talk About Melanin. So my name is James Forrest, so you may remember me from the first one. So just to let you know, a quick introduction of myself. So my name's James. I work in the NHS based in Leeds at the moment. So tonight we'll be joined by 5 of our guests, so mixture of student podiatrists, but also some more experienced podiatrists as well. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves in just a second, and then I'll talk through the running order of tonight's session. So we'll start at the top with Dao. Just introduce yourself, please, for me.
Hi, my name is Tunprasert. I'm a lecturer at in podiatry at University of Brighton, and I'm also a private podiatrist as well.
Excellent, thank you very much. Okay, next, Amor.
Hi, I'm Amor. I'm a qualified podiatrist working in Barbados. My specialty would be in diabetes foot care.
Excellent, thank you very much, Amor. Okay, next on to Ada.
Hello, my name's Ada Fraser. I'm a third-year undergraduate podiatry student at Queen Margaret's University in Edinburgh, Scotland.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, Meghana.
Hello everyone, I'm Meghana, a second-year undergrad podiatrist at University of Brighton.
Excellent, and last but not least, Yar.
Hi everyone, my name's Yara Jari. I'm a student podiatrist at the University of Brighton as well. I'm in my first year of the MSc pre-reg programme.
Excellent, thank you very much. Okay, so we've got good representation from across the country and a little sprinkling of Caribbean sunshine as well, which is, we're really lucky to have, but we're very jealous at the same time as well. Okay then, so tonight's chat, we're going to go for 1 second. So we're going to split into 3 different parts. We're just going to talk, first of all, a discussion with our students, talking about their journey so far and how what we've been doing so far is going to benefit them in their future careers. There'll be some time for some Q&As as well. And the second half, we'll be talking ourselves as experienced podiatrists, talking about our journeys and passing on some hopefully useful hints and tips. And then we'll finish at the end with a bit of a summary about next steps and where we go from here. Okay, so I'm going to introduce Meghana and Ada, first of all, and they're going to just discuss their journey and their learning so far. Okay, go ahead then, ladies.
So now that we've introduced ourselves, we'll start by explaining our route into podiatry. So Ada and Yar, what encouraged you to pursue podiatry as a career?
I entered podiatry as a mature student. I wanted to change my career as I had been working with vulnerable adults in different areas, starting as a carer. And that led me to gain a degree in social sciences and explore how social care had to adapt to service users with different needs. This led me to work with vulnerable women in a range of settings. However, after the birth of my daughter, I did want to remain working in health and social care, whereby I could balance being a professional and a mother. But working with vulnerable women was satisfying. However, it also meant very unsociable hours. And this was difficult to balance after I had Carmen. So I attended an open day where I was initially interested in occupational therapy, but I came across podiatry. I'd not heard much about podiatry, but realized very quickly how the profession is growing. It offered a new skill set to learn. So I was drawn to that, and also allowed for opportunities for me to work both in the NHS and in the private sector. So that was sort of the beginnings of it for me. And yourself, yeah?
So I started off teaching actually. So I've been teaching for about, well, I had been teaching, I'm still teaching for about 21 years. And my initial interest in podiatry was ignited by my dad being diagnosed with Parkinson's actually. And I used to go down to St. Thomas's with him for his appointments so that he can, you know, they can do his gait and all of that. And it dawned on me then, as he progressively became more ill, the significance of his feet and how important it was for him to maintain, you know, the health and the use of his feet, because you could see, as that independence diminished, the mental state also diminished as well. And in actual fact, I wanted to do it about 10 years ago, but because my own children were very young then, I sort of put it on hold until now. So that was my initial catalyst into for pursuing podiatry. But as I've read and, had the opportunity to explore a bit more, there were very clear correlations with obviously diabetes and foot health and the prevalence within our Black communities, and the extension of what I would learn in podiatry actually became my my inspiration for what I want to do in podiatry, which is to perhaps go out to Ghana, which is where I'm from, to perhaps work in that sort of area, addressing needs for illnesses or conditions such as diabetes. So that's what got me into it.
Awesome. And yourself, Meghana?
Well, I always knew that healthcare was the place for me. And what I liked about podiatry was the holistic approach that the patients were allowed to undergo. I think it's still a niche profession to this day, so I was curious to find out more. The opportunities that podiatry has over other allied health professions were ample. I could specialise in surgery or pursue sports medicine or even focus on paediatric patients. While some of us may feel overwhelmed with all this choice, I like that aspect of so many doors being open with this degree. Me particularly, I'm hoping to specialise in surgery and treat those high-risk patients with potential mobility issues. So with that in mind, what challenges or barriers do you foresee following graduation, Ada and Yo?
Well, as third-year students, I think the last academic year has been shaped by the COVID pandemic, and it's just changed the landscape completely and very quickly. So I think many students and universities had to adapt to different ways of learning and teaching. Clinical placement changed with less hours or not being able to see a wide range of patients that students usually see pre-COVID times. And I feel that all students, we learned how resilient we had to be in this year of sort of uncertainty. But an area I got interested into was health inequalities, which I think has always been present in healthcare. And I think COVID has become a catalyst in sort of highlighting the topic. The initial COVID-related deaths on the front line directly affected sort of the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic community disproportionately. And coupled with sort of environmental factors at the height of the pandemic, it started many conversations about health inequalities and where they stemmed from. So there were two areas that I think came to mind, which was dermatology within podiatry. And I began to have conversations about research and evidence in darker skin types and the language used to describe darker skin types and why resources available were sort of lacking in teaching. And that meant that students were maybe not as well prepared to assess patients with darker skin types and not have the tools available to reference the variations in different skin types. Another area that we've come across is demographics are used regularly within healthcare and in type 2 diabetes within the African and the South Asian communities. It is more prevalent compared to other demographics, and in some communities 3 times more likely to develop type 2 diabetes. So as a person from one of the communities, I was interested to know what health interventions were taking place. Are they working? And so got to reading some papers, and there's clear evidence that Black and Caribbean communities are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes at least 10 or 12 years younger than their white counterparts. So health interventions created by the NHS to sort of support patients, with all patients with type 2 with a type 2 diagnosis, it is also centered around health information and lifestyle and diet. And these are sort of the cornerstones of managing the disorder. And it's very important that patients can access this information. And as health providers, I felt like we have a duty to sort of adapt the information so that it is accessible. And I think understanding culture is essential to sort of creating an environment where podiatrists can better provide healthcare solutions and support. So podiatrists will certainly see patients with type 2 diabetics diagnosis come into clinic with vascular problems. So as a student, my location can also determine the demographics of a patient that comes into clinic. So it's very positive to be able to have conversations about how the profession can better support patients from different demographics, and hopefully do a bit more research in the areas of dermatology and darker skins, and support groups from different ethnicities with a lot more understanding. I don't know if any of this resonated with yourselves.
Well, that's similar to me, actually. My biggest fear, I think, is treating patients from a wider range of demographic backgrounds than what I'm used to seeing. A huge part of podiatry is diabetes, and as you clearly highlighted, the prevalence of this in certain communities is unproportional, to say the least. I sometimes wonder why the dermatology resources for those at the higher end of the Fitzpatrick scale are lacking when that community is more likely to need our support as a podiatrist. So it does make me wonder how I go from having minimal experience of this in my 3 or 4 years of training to dealing with it in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent, great points.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of, we've touched on one of my biggest, well, a challenge, not a fear, a challenge, that in the training, by the end of my training, my exposure or my experience with darker skin tones, the upper end of the Fitzpatrick scale, will be, you know, I'll have a gap in my knowledge in how to support and work with my patients. And it is a real worry because we have the information available with regards to statistics and data and prevalence of certain conditions within certain communities, but I'm not sure why or how we can move forward to make this information inform part of our core learning and you know, influence our practice in the long term. So it's a challenge, not a fear, a challenge.
Excellent.
I think, you know,
Ella, go ahead. Any of the comments I was going to ask for, but go ahead.
I don't know. I don't know about fears, but I feel that as a student, the connections or the people I've met, my teachers and at university, it's been lovely to have these conversations. And so for me, I think that's really a good sign. I think the great fear is once you do qualify and you get that job, you know, it's the whole idea of adapting to a new situation and a new environment. And I think those are normal fears that we will all face, you know, because we're working towards qualification. But once we start practicing, that's a whole new area in which we have to sort of adapt and learn. And I think that's normal to have that, you know. But the main thing is to, you know, build on all the sort of networks and all the people you've met along your journey. I found it's not that hard to just pick up the phone or message somebody and ask for some advice. And I've always managed to sort of get an answer. And that's been a positive experience for me.
Excellent. Good. Okay, some really good points there, everybody. I think as students, I think I spoke to some of you guys last week about this, I think it's great that we can have these conversations. I think that it's important that it's everyone's business to be aware of this type of learning as well. I think when I was close to graduating a few years ago, my main conversations were about which blade is best to use for enucleating corns? Is it an 11 or is it a 15? And they were kind of the conversations that we were having in clinic. So to be here now having this conversation is brilliant. I think it's, you know, it should be on everyone's agenda anyway, but I think that for our patients, as you've mentioned, it's going to be the best thing for them as well, making sure that we're getting everyone equal care and everybody fair care as well. So really good to hear your points on there. I'm just seeing if you've got any chats in the comments. Yeah, so Evelyn Weir says that we are always learning, Ada. You are right. I think that's correct. We're constantly learning, and being open to learning is very, very important as well. That's great. Okay, excellent. Okay, any other comments from our more experienced podiatrists? What was it like when you were graduating? What were your main concerns and fears, and was this ever a topic during your time as a student?
Well, when I was a student, I would have qualified about 8, 9 years ago now. And one of my biggest concerns was I was training in the UK, but I had always planned to return to Barbados. And the demographic of patients I was seeing, because I would have qualified at the University of Brighton as well. So the demographic there is definitely not what I see here. And in speaking to my lecturers at the time, their advice was placements. Placements became very, very important. So I decided, or I was advised to do my placement in Lewisham and Bromley. So that exposed me to a wider demographic of people, but it's still nothing compared to the demographic. It's not similar to what I see here still. Back then, the NHS was a lot different. So you could see, like right now, basically it's kind of like high risk only being seen in the NHS. And this was before you had made that grand switch. So you were kind of seeing a piece of everybody at that point. So you could get a wider variety of people, but now it is, from what I understand, very high risk people. But in returning to one of my issues as well back then was why joining that conversation we had last session was so important to me, because that was important to me at the time. Identifying certain things in a darker complexion, saying that I was returning to a place that was predominantly darker complexions. And the truth of the matter is you learn when you get there. Is taking key things, having a key eye. If you're fortunate enough to work alongside a more experienced practitioner in dealing with those people, that really helped me initially. So the fact that I came into a practice, I was an autonomous practitioner, but I had that person there to bounce things off of. Taking pictures is really important as well, just to for your own documenting and for teaching purposes, which it comes in handy if you plan to do outreach and stuff. And in speaking to people, it's better sometimes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So once you have those key things, knowing, yes, it's a deeper complexion, but things still can be seen. It's just a matter of getting exposed to it and seeing it. I would recommend to any student, if you are an international student, even if it's not a recognized placement by your university, to try to go to the environment you plan to work in and shadow or do, just organize your own placements. Most podiatrists are lovely. And if you reach out to them, they will be happy for you to come into the clinic and just watch what they do and just get familiar with the people that you will be seeing. What's also very useful is getting used to the pathways and getting used to who you have access to inside of the UK. Although the NHS is bashed quite a bit, it is still pretty good compared. It is one of the better healthcare systems I have been a part of. So if you plan to go to a remote area like I am, you don't necessarily have all those resources available in terms of who to refer to ideally and following like the nice guidelines and stuff for management. So it means that you have to be aware of what you should do and make the best of the resources you have available. So if you decide to do your own, organize your own placement when you're on holiday, you get to familiar with what is available to you there. And you can already kind of think about or organize in your mind, okay, well, I don't have a vascular surgeon on where I'm going to be living. So who am I going to refer to if I have someone coming in with chronic peripheral vascular disease and that kind of thing. And in many instances, you're not supported either. So it's not a large, in my instance, there's not a large number of podiatrists. So you're fighting your battles in clinic, but you don't have enough manpower to have the support if you want to make a significant change. That comes into what Ya was speaking about and wanting to return to Ghana. That is a challenge that you will meet, where when you go there, because there's not a structured podiatry system there, you usually have to be the person that has to go in and say, right, okay, so this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm qualified to do. This is the research behind this. And you're being clinical, but then you have to come in and be more on the administrative side or pushing policies and that, because you are the only in some instances, the only person who is one, interested and two, qualified to do it. And that makes the job, more challenging, I would say.
Yeah.
So university doesn't prepare you for that. University prepares you for clinic. So a lot of what you learn is on the ground. Once you hit the ground, be prepared to hit the ground running. And resources like this is really good, I think, for students, because we didn't have these things when I was a student. There was no Tomorrow's Podiatry back then.
Yeah.
So there was a community of darker skinned people looking to help one another. That wasn't there. I had to rely on the resources I had once I got back in the country. And I was fortunate enough to have a mentor. She ended up being my mentor, really, to help me along at first. And then once you get foot in, you just kind of go. But it is a natural fear to have. Unfortunately, no placement can prepare you for life in clinic, as Ms. Ware said. You are continuously learning. That's where CPDs come in. That's where having talks with people and staying connected to your friends. Get a buddy in university to bounce things off of. If you plan to go private and be solo, it comes in really, really handy. There's some things that I still see and don't know what it is. And, you have to make a reference back to research. Don't be afraid to say you don't know. You'll never know everything. And just be upfront with patients. Patients like to hear when you say, okay, well, I'm not quite sure, but I know that I can test this and I can test that. And at least I can ask a question here to know if I can be referred there, kind of thing. Like, that never ends. Knowing everything that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
You just become more familiar.
Excellent. No, great points. Great points there, Amor. Okay, then, and Dow, so what, from your experience, going back to your almost graduated days, were these kind of conversations on the list for you, or is it something that's only become more prevalent recently?
First of all, I would like to say, actually, me and Amor, we were studying in the same year, and we went to the Lewisham placement together. So we were on this since like our uni days, basically. But I agree with all of what Amor said, basically. And I don't know, like it's just I agree that definitely in our studying days there wasn't as much resources. I think there are more resources now, but it's like going from probably 0.5% to like 2%. So it's still a wider gap to fill. But definitely there's been an improvement in terms of resources. But the challenges still, especially for those who come to this country to train and then think about going back or to other country, is about the exposure to the kind of population that you see, especially on placement. And as Amor pointed out, and as you Brighton student knows, Eastbourne is quite the patient population is largely white. So I think Amor point on taking the matter into your own hands, doing some international placement during the holiday is definitely useful. There are lots of places and lots of programs that you can join, you know, especially with the charity type stuff. So I'm not sure about like other zone of the world, but in Asia, you can go to Nepal, for example, Nepal leprosy test, and you learn absolutely everything because you have to do absolutely everything. That will be medical team there, but they're not necessarily podiatrists, for example. So there are experience out there that you can, you know, go and experience. And definitely, I mean, the current situation is not really helping at the moment. What else should I add about this? Because Amor like cover a lot of the points, so now I'm thinking, what else should I talk about? I think another thing, probably I would like to caution anyone who would like to just, you know, like you said, yeah, that you want to go back to Ghana. I would advise in the initial years, probably 2 years or something like that, just to get experience where there are already structure in place. Because if you have to go to a country where there is no system, then it's not only about clinical experience, but it's about how to create a system, which is another level of complexity that can be quite difficult to achieve. But I'm not saying it's impossible, because there are people who are pioneering podiatry in other countries around the world. So I think we have had someone who graduated from Brighton, and now I think, if I remember correctly, oh no one can help me here. I think she's gone back to Pakistan. I think that's one. And definitely, like, I know in Thailand, for example, there are only 3 or 4 other podiatrists who are Thai, and majority of them are still around the world, not back to Thailand. So, you know, it's a difficult task, basically.
It is very noble, might I add, and I was similarly driven. Like my entry into podiatry, my background is in science, so my first degree is in biochemistry and chemistry. I was a scientist, and then I wanted to get into healthcare, and podiatry came up. And why it came up is that in Barbados there are only 7 podiatrists, with me included, and that's on the whole island. And we are kind of known as the amputation capital of the Caribbean in this area. We have maybe 1 in 5 adults being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And last time I checked, I think it was about 300 amputations a year. That's both minor as well as major amputations, which is a lot for a demographic of roughly 280,000 people. So if you think about that, these statistics are startling, and that's what kind of got me into. So before even being trained, I kind of knew that diabetes was going to be my role or my interest, because of where I was coming to live, and because the people here really needed help. The struggle is that, again, with little manpower, or in some instances being the only person, is that it's rough. It's really, really rough. And when you have to fight up because managing patients can be difficult as well, because one of the things that I thought was lacking was education. So when I came back, I did a lot of charity work and a lot of outreach talks and speaking to both nurses as well as physicians, because you'd be surprised how many physicians actually don't know how to take care of feet. Like, every foot pain is plantar fasciitis. Anything to do with a toenail is an ingrown toenail. So, you know, they don't usually manage feet problems properly, and I think that's across the board. Their dressings are just laughable. Most GPs can't do dressings. But when I thought, okay, well, I'm going to come back, I'm going to go to the community, I was part of a radio show, I was part of a TV show, and I was doing all this outreach. And then I realized that it's not necessarily that people don't know, is that people still do what they want anyway. And changing patients' behavior is hard. It is really, really hard. And you kind of get frustrated because, or it's mentally taxing, I should say. You don't get frustrated. It's mentally taxing to be that one person fighting for people or fighting for a demographic of people who aren't fighting for themselves. And it can take a toll. And that's, again, something that they don't teach you in school. That's only something you're going to realize when you get into working, that working in healthcare takes a mental toll. And if you are not supported by other people in your field, if you're working isolated, especially if you're going somewhere to kind of start the whole thing, it's not impossible, but it's difficult. And it's something to keep in mind for most, if you are planning. And as Doe recommended, getting that experience behind you in a more structured environment, unless you will be supported when you go there, is very, very important, in my opinion. It is noble, as I said, to want to do that, but I would recommend to anyone who is going to be leaving, being trained in the UK and then going away from the UK to work, because once you qualify, you are going to be safe according to codes of conduct and codes of competency and proficiency. But it's kind of like learning to drive. Once you learn to drive, you can legally drive, but can you really? So it's kind of the same thing. And if you go about it like that and know that you have to learn and be open to learning, any day you walk into clinic and you feel as if you know everything, or you get to a point where a patient starts to explain their history, you kind of cut them off because you already know what it is, you need to take a break, because it means then that you're kind of going by rote and not actually having patient-focused care and patient-centered care anymore. So, yeah.
I think Amor raised a good point as well about patient education and, I suppose, patient compliance thing. I think this part is the invisible part of, I know we talk about darker skin type and, dermatological condition, things like that, but actually it's not only about the physiological part, but it's about the cultural aspect.
Yes.
And the weather in the country and the social aspect. It's like it's all of these invisible aspect that come into play when you're treating that particular person as well. That if you're not exposed to that population, then you may never be aware of that. There may be certain culture, certain aspect of the environment that you may never know.
One of the things for me, especially culturally, is being exposed to a number of cultures. And university helped me with that quite a bit. We are not the most culturally diverse here. Barbados is predominantly Black. We do have a small Indian community, a small Caucasian community, but you still get exposed to a number of different people. So, for instance, I had an ulcer patient who was Muslim, and they have their rituals and stuff. But one of the things I would have recommended was not getting his feet wet, but washing is integral to their religion. So it's kind of meeting people halfway as well. The other thing is living in a hot climate. Like right now, it is 29 degrees outside. So if you want persons to wear enclosed shoes all the time, that is just not going to happen. So sandals, flip-flops, barefootedness is something that we fight up with diabetics in Barbados. They almost refuse to wear enclosed shoes, or even shoes inside the house is a foreign concept here. So you can imagine that we get lots of nail punctures, lots of punctures in general. The other thing is, it is still very, to get men to cream their skin, to moisturize their skin, culturally, that doesn't happen. It really does not. If I have a diabetic patient with heel fissures and stuff, and I want him to moisturize, I better be telling his wife, because he's not going to do it. And then you get Barbados is hot. You expect me to cream my skin? That's going to keep me more hot. And so understanding the cultural norms is important in recommending advice to patients. And a lot of it is meeting people halfway, because everything that you want and that you know they need to do, sometimes it's better to be incremental instead of them coming into the first time to see you and you're saying, okay, right, so you need to change everything. You need to change your shoes, you need to do this, you need to do that, and taking a more gentle approach to it and letting them see that, okay, well, see, you started creaming your feet twice a week and look at the difference your skin has made. Imagine if you were doing it every day. And little things like that to encourage them, you know, making that comes into outcomes, having measurable outcomes, and that's where the photos and stuff come into play as well. So, you know, remember when those heels, those fissures on your heels were painful? Look at this, look how far you've come. And, you know, that helps a lot. Sounds silly, but it does help. And working around things like that will make your job a lot easier.
Brilliant. No, some good tips there. I think, I think all the points you've made there more about footwear and compliance with footwear is really important. I think from my experience working in Leeds, we get a really good mixture of patients from different cultural backgrounds, and working in MSK, getting sometimes some Asian patients to wear shoes is very, very hard. So they've got, you know, arthritic joints, and the only way you can help them is either by steroid injection and or using an orthotic, and the conversation just has to stop there. So it's kind of finding ways of gently explaining, if you do wear this may help you X, Y, Z%. And sometimes the more extreme treatments aren't the best. So people sometimes want an injection because this still hurts, but just changing the footwear alone is a big thing. And we don't always, we spend a lot of time on the clinical skills and focus, which is obviously really important for safety and so forth as well. But it's these soft skills. And I think, as you mentioned, making networks, having these conversations with colleagues and so on, and working out ways of tackling these frequently asked questions or frequently posed questions in clinic is really, really important. And that's just not just amongst people who've got dark skin tones. That can be across the board. Getting diabetic patients to wear shoes at home is a challenge, regardless of background, is a challenge. So that's definitely something to think about as you guys graduate and go into the brave new world of working. Right then, good. Okay, so what I wanted to ask next then is, so we've talked about a few good top tips actually, because some really good hints and tips and what we can do as new grads and so forth going into the world of podiatry. So what tips would you do in terms of dealing with difficult patients? That's one thing we don't spend probably a lot of time on in university. So, for example, the frequently asked question that anybody that's not from a white background gets asked is, where are you from? But where are you really from? So I get asked this on a weekly basis, not daily no more, because people have asked that question and have seen me a few times now. So for student podiatrists, first of all, how do you deal with these types of questions, and how does it make you feel, first of all?
Well, I don't know. I mean, my father's from Scotland and my mom's from Kenya, and I'm doing my degree in Scotland, and I find when people ask me like where I'm from, I tend to get that question more on campus.
Right.
my patients seem to be a little bit more understanding, or have put it together, because my name tag says Ada Fraser.
Right.
And I use language and colloquialisms, which is of the city of Edinburgh. I've not really come across that, and I think it's possibly because I am a mature student. I'm sort of 40 now, so maybe I think with a lot of the patients, they look at me as not as their equal, but maybe I'm closer to their age than maybe some of my colleagues. So I think for me, I get that question more on campus. I've had more of that coming from my younger colleagues in university, which is, not a problem really. But the question of where you're from, or where are you really from, I find because I'm a bit older, I don't get it so much. But when about 20 years ago, I got that quite a lot. And the way I look at it is I just simply explained it as, my dad's Scottish and my mum's Kenyan. And I left it at that. I kind of left it there in terms of, well, you figure out, where you think I'm from. But I think as I've gotten older, it's a question that it doesn't bother me so much. I feel once I've got scrubs on and my name there, and because I'm a bit older, I've never had issues with it so much. However, I've seen, for example, maybe younger students of my same demographic are not spared that, and I think it's just the fact that maybe they're a bit younger, you know. But where are you really from? The second time, where are you really from? Honestly speaking, I sort of look at my patient and might just say, "Excuse me." You know, do you want to ask that question again, or do you want me to treat you? And I think that's something I've learned over time. But I don't know what it's like for my other colleagues. So this is an interesting question. I'd like to know how you react to that question.
Yeah.
So for me, the "where you from originally" question happens it happens very often. The first time I was asked where I was from originally as student podiatrist was first term, but I had been given the heads up about the patient because I think in his notes it had down that he had issues being treated by people that didn't look like him, or there had been an issue with a particular patient before. Unfortunately for him, or fortunately for him, whichever way you look at it, he was being treated by 2 Black students. And the question came, "Where are you from originally?" And I said, "Oh, Southwest London, Streatham actually, born in Clapham, brought up in Brixton / Streatham." And he was, you know, sort of like, you could see where he was going with his questioning. And then he asked my colleague where she was from, and she divulged to him where she was from, but he wasn't satisfied that I hadn't divulged where I was from originally. So he was trying to, you know, induce the answer to his question from me. But like I said, I had been given the heads up by my tutor, and in the end, I didn't answer his question. However, I did. I hope, and I think I have modified his approach to how he comes into clinic, because it was coming up to Christmas time. I'm sorry, I'm waffling now. It was coming up to Christmas time, and I don't know why I felt I needed to make him feel I'm equally as British as he is. So I said, "Oh, Christmas time, I'm not fussing too much about the kids now. I'm just going to get a couple of oranges, clementines, whatever it is, stick them in the stocking and throw it on the mantelpiece." And for him, it sort of, you know, took him back a bit to, you know, to check himself. So I didn't actually answer the question. Anytime I know he's in, I actually run for his notes. So I've worked with him 3 times, and we actually have a really good session when he's in. You know, he disclosed that he's been diagnosed with Parkinson's the last time around. Our conversation is very different. But on the flip side of things, that "where are you from originally" question doesn't necessarily need to come from a place of like from a malicious place, because I have answered "where are you from" originally because of the way in which it was put across. And most recently it was because a patient was genuinely interested in where I was from originally, because they had spent, I think, something like 25 years in West Africa doing missionary work, and the question was posed because she wanted to know if I go home often, or if I have the opportunity to travel out there. So generally, my experience of where you're from originally happens a lot in clinic, but I gauge based on the premise in which the question is coming from.
Yeah,
So.
brilliant. Good summary there. I think because it is a question that you get asked a lot, either as a student podiatrist or a graduate podiatrist. But yeah, it's just how to deal with it. And I think the key thing for me that when I get asked it is sometimes I answer depending on the tone of the question and try and find out why it's important to the patient that they know. So and sometimes if I answer where I'm from in Yorkshire, I'm from a place called Bradford, and it's like, and that because of class as well, that gets a bit of a bad reaction sometimes. But then if I say, "Okay, where you really from?" that question gets answered. So, well, my parents are from Jamaica. And that gets a bit of reaction too, because if for whatever reason they've got a perception that it's not a great country and all the rest of it. So yeah, you'll get asked it. And I think with experience, I think because I'm, you know, a mature and older adult now, I guess. So I've had that question asked all my life, no matter what career I've had done. So you kind of build a tolerance to it. You almost have a preset answer in your mind. So I think, you know, as anyone graduating, can go to graduating now, just speak to other podiatrists or other health professionals actually, and just speak to them about how they cope and how they, you know, deal with it as well. And one of the key things for me in saying to patients is like, you know, I'm here to treat you. So I'll keep the questions short about me and let's focus on you, because sometimes you'll have 20 minutes and you can't use all your time answering questions about your history, your background, your qualification. If there's time for that, great, but often there's not. So it's all about, you know, try to manage it in a mature way, but they definitely speak to the health professionals about how they cope with being asked that question. Okay, so any other comments on the where you're from and where are you really from question?
Can I just add something to, it just happens to be a conversation I had with one of my lecturers today with regards to the procedures that are in place at Brighton to address that. And the reason why I want to raise it is because she was actually very open in saying, you know, they're not sure if the approach is correct, which is, I think the patient gets, you know, it gets put on their notes and they get spoken to. And she wanted to know if that was, you know, the right, she wanted to know if there's the right procedure, whether it was the right thing to do. I said, you know what, just speak to, you know, those that perhaps it has an impact on, in order to formulate how you proceed from there. Because the second example of the patient I gave that said, you know, where are you from originally, it's all about the context in which that, you know, question may also be answered. And it was received really well, and it appears as though we will have that conversation as a school in order to have, you know, things that are put in place that are impactful for, you know, addressing that particular question.
I used to get asked that question quite a bit, but I think what was different for me is I was Black, but also had an accent.
Yes, yeah.
So I used to get it asked. Once it was a new patient, they would ask me where I was from. Yeah. I never had it you know, I never took it offensively at all, because I know my accent is very thick. I was obviously not from the UK. And and most of them will go, "You're from Barbados? What are you doing here?" I was like, "I'm just here to study," and then I'm gone. That's what it was. My whole intention was just to get the qualification and go back to Barbados, because that was the next question usually after where I'm from, if I plan to stay. And once I told them no, that was fine. I find the demographic of students a little bit more even diverse than when me and Doe were there, actually, because if you cast your mind back, I was the only Black girl in my year. And I think while I was there, maybe only had one other Black girl across the whole school in podiatry. And it was only one guy from Africa in my year. And even in Eastbourne as a whole, the demographic has changed, because when I went back to do my master's, I found that the diversity even among students was a lot more diverse than it was at the time when I was there. I was quite surprised and pleasantly so. I remember having any Black hair products when it was there, and they have now, so they're stepping towards the right direction. They're getting somewhere there with diversity. But that is, I used to get asked that even in shops and stuff. So it is something that was asked. But I think for me, my unique situation was my accent. My accent usually gives it away. I don't sound British.
Yeah. Great points there. Thanks, Amor. Okay, and then just one quick one before we obviously conscious of the time now. But another question that gets frequently asked in clinic is why feet? Why do you choose feet? Do you like feet? So this is another commonly asked question. So let's start with Dow. How do you respond to such questions in clinic?
Well, actually, I have several questions to this, depending on my mood. Several answers, sorry. sometimes I say I give very scientific answer, like, oh, feet is a very complex structure and there's so many interesting things about it. Sometimes I would just say, oh, there's no podiatrist in Thailand, so I thought it would be interesting to do something new. Sometimes I just say, I like feet. So depends on my mood, depends on the patient, how jokingly we are when we're discussing this, really. But I like what Ya said earlier, I think it depends on the intention of the patient, and normally they're just curious. So yeah. What about the rest of you?
Well, I get asked if I have a foot fetish quite often. I'll just say that. So I usually, once someone asks me that, I usually say, well, who will be taking care of your feet if I didn't become a podiatrist?
Exactly. Yeah. Put it back on the patient.
Yeah.
Exactly. And how about you, Meghana, as a student, been in your sort of second year? How have you been asked that question, and how do you cope with such queries from patients?
I'm actually asked, why not a doctor or why not a nurse? Why did you go into feet? And I say, just similar to what Dal said, because the feet are so complex. And in the 3 years that I spend at university, I'm basically a mini doctor. I mean, the amount of science that goes into podiatry is actually like quite similar to what medical school would teach. So yeah, that's my kind of stock response, really.
Good.
Yeah, I have had. Have you had a foot fetish? Yeah.
Yeah, you get that. You get that at least once a week. I think I always say, like, if I get asked, why feet? I say, well, I'm not just interested in feet. I'm interested in the person. And then they go, oh, and because that gets the mind busy, thinking, oh, yeah, it's all about the whole body, whole person, whatever. That's it gets the conversation closed down. But there are some good ones. But it's like I said, we could go about frequently asked questions like for hours, because there are some common ones you'll get asked as students and graduates as well. But definitely something worth having a conversation about. Sometimes they're a bit of fun. Sometimes they can be a little bit more sort of sinister. But I think just talking about them and finding out how a more experienced person would deal with it is really important. Okay.
What's hilarious is when they come in and they go, do you have to take my shoes and socks off?
Yes. That's another one. Yeah.
And I kind of go, yeah, that will help.
Yeah. That's always a funny one as well. Oh gosh. Right then, so just conscious of the time, so we're going to go through some quick sort of tips then before we go. So talking about sort of next steps. So all the things we've discussed today, some obviously funny, some quite serious stuff as well. But when obviously graduating and going into your new professions now, as ones that are going to be going into new professions soon, is that thinking about a few different things about support. We mentioned this earlier on in the chat. So wherever you work, whether it's private practice or in the NHS, there are support mechanisms in place. If you do face any issues or any sexism, racism, anything like that, you've got ways to report it that are at work. So you've got your equality diversity teams, you've got your line manager should be your first point of call as well. You also have sort of the college do have support. You've got reps that you can contact and discuss these issues with as well, and make sure that you do report them. I would encourage you to do that. I think because if things aren't getting reported, then there's no learning that's going to happen. And then for the next person that's coming through that looks like yourself, how are they going to cope? And the sad thing that I've seen in my short career is that people leave the profession for reasons that are related to the profession, if that makes sense. So because they've felt not supported or they've not had that mentorship and things like that as well. So making sure that you seek these things and make an informed choice of where you're going to work. If you're in a place that isn't a very diverse community, that's just how it is. You may not come across that many cases of patients with darker skin tones that you might not feel confident enough to treat or diagnose that. But then that's when it's important, as Amor said before, is to build those networks. So there's plenty of podiatrists around the country, also the world, and using social media like Twitter to make some contacts as well. So have you ever seen this? How do you deal with this? Or I've come across this skin concern today. I've never seen it before. Does anybody know X, Y, or Z? Networking not just within our profession, but outside of the profession as well. So look at other people who deal in skin, so dermatologists, sometimes tissue viability nurses who may know a little bit more about things like this than yourselves. But also be available to help you and also to help you learn as well. So it's, you know, really important that we try and, you know, don't feel like isolated, don't feel like you're alone. There are going to be many things that even, you know, I'm 7 years into my career now, and, you know, you might meet people who've been in the career 20 years, and there's things that you still haven't seen. You might only come across it once. So don't, you know, graduate panicking, thinking, right, I've got to be an expert on everything. You can't know everything. In our courses, even though they're quite condensed, we do learn a lot on our course, but there's so much more to learn. So don't, you know, be worrying about not knowing what you don't know. It's all about exposure, experience, and so on as well. One of the points that I think Dan made earlier about seeking placements in different areas. So if you live in quite a remote area, but you want to get some shadowing experience in a more urban area, then just ask. There's no harm for that. You know, we've had at my trust people coming from different cities come to shadow some of our clinics as well, just to see how things are done. And these are in, you know, being in things like pediatrics, where you might not have a lot of experience or exposure to, and things like that as well, but also in MSK. So just ask, send an email, drop a line. You know, we're quite a small profession. You know, the vast majority of podiatrists are really, really helpful and want to try and help and bring other people along, and are very happy for you to ask them questions as well. So don't be scared, or don't be afraid of that, really. I did have a PowerPoint to put up quickly, but I'll just read off it rather than putting it onto the screen. So just a few take-home points, really. So I think the key things are, you know, if you're not sure, just ask. It's really, really simple. No one's an expert. Just find an expert, or find someone who knows a little bit more about you within your peer group or online. Listening. So for people who are not sure about how to approach conversations about patients with different skin tones, just approach a colleague. You know, be prepared to listen as well, and be prepared to learn about their experiences. And also, your patients are often walking textbooks. You learn a lot just from talking to your patients. So even if you're not exposed to different podiatrists of different backgrounds and so forth as well, just learn from your patients. Ask them about, you know, a little bit about the cultural background. A lot of patients are more than happy to talk to you about their lived experiences, and that's, you know, for me, been one of the best learning experiences after graduating. I've learned a hell of a lot just by asking my patients. So, you know, why don't you, why wouldn't you wear, you know, proper shoes? Or it's because of X, Y, Z. Or why do you prefer to why won't you use emollients? As Amor said, getting, you know, males to not use emollients sometimes is really hard, just because it's just a cultural thing. So, but also people are afraid of social criticisms as well. But if it's to their benefit, to benefit their health, then they're more than happy to do that, really. Okay, so last couple of points I will make. So changes within the NHS at the moment, and outside the NHS as well, in terms of supporting the whole agenda on being more aware of treating patients with different skin tones, but also as a podiatrist who's from a different background as well, there's lots of support out there. So what's already available to support you? There's several zero tolerance policies in the workplace. So there should be ways to report any harassment or any problems. Your workplace, you should also have lone working policies. So these are things to ask about on interview, or pre-read before you go on interview. What are they? How do they work? You know, what's involved in those kind of things. If you're in an NHS trust, speak to your librarian. It's probably the most underused service in the NHS. So they can get any, you know, access to most resources that you need. So if you think, oh, I need to find out a little bit more about this, speak to the librarian. They'll happily do the searches for you. So don't think you're going to have to just do that all alone. Okay. It's important to, obviously, as I mentioned before, making the networks, finding mentor groups, finding discussion groups, using platforms like this. So hopefully one day, you guys who are students on the call, in a year or two's time when you're graduating and fully out there, you'll do the same, and just pass on some of what your learning experiences has been. And it'd be interesting also to see what the changes has been from the last couple of years to the next couple of years when you've graduated, and all these things now there's a big spotlight on health inequalities and so forth as well. So it'd be interesting to see how that changes. And then a question for Dal finally. So I think we had a discussion a couple of weeks ago about changes in academia. So looking at things like revalidation and so on as well. So do you have any comments about that, and how the academic syllabus could be changed to help include a lot more information about treating patients from different skin tone backgrounds and so forth as well?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's better, but there are room for more improvement. And I think I can't speak for all university, but definitely at Brighton, we are revalidating our course. So we definitely looking to include, you know, a lot more of resources about different skin colors, and not only, in my opinion anyway, it's not only about dermatology, but also because of about things like, for example, in Asian population, flat feet might be a common thing, but it's not necessarily a pathological problem.
Yes.
That kind of aspect of things as well. So it's things that we definitely be including more in the academia. And as you guys mentioned about, you know, change that we see in the society is definitely will influence the policy and the things that will go into, you know, the further revalidation of different courses. And I think the College of Podiatry has done, what's it called again? James Town Hall?
The town hall, yeah, town hall discussions. They were last month, I think. So looking at how they can help sort of make it a central point of learning nationally as well. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, so certainly that I suppose will feed into, you know, what are the stance in terms of the College of Podiatry when it comes to accrediting other courses in the future as well.
Brilliant. Excellent. Okay then, so just have a look in the chat, see if you've got any questions about any of the things that we've discussed tonight, or any of the closing comments from the panel, really. So what are your top tip? So I know it's a nervous time for all our students now, all graduating and going to the world of work. So any top tips that you'd like to give them, really, in terms of how to get through their interviews for one, or top tips about how to cope within the whole new world of being a graduated podiatrist?
I think I have one, but it's more of a, I suppose, for a long-term career thing. I find that if you can find some people who are similar to you, and you can look at that person as your little bit like an idol, right? It will help to inspire you to progress further within the career. I'm serious. So when I first start out, you know, when you know nothing, you kind of like have to look, okay, so what is available for me? How far can I get? So, you know, having those kind of idols in your head, idol figures in your head can be quite helpful as well, especially, you know, and as you progress further, I know initially it might be a bit nerve-wracking, but as you progress further, you could also actually make contacts with those idols as well. For example, I have had a professor who I have admired as an idol for like a long time because of research. And then I decided, you know what, I'm just going to email this person who I've never known before. And I received great support from them. So, you know, just a little tip for you.
Good tip.
To stalk. Top tip.
Yes. Yeah.
Got it.
Our top tip for me is just go for it. Don't be afraid. Obviously, you've done the 3 years or 4 years, depending on if you're north of the border or south of the study. So the course does prepare you well to be safe and have safe clinical practice. But just don't be afraid to make contact. Don't be afraid to admit you don't know. I think Amor said that point earlier, really, because you're not going to know everything. So be honest with with patients, be honest with yourself as well. If you find gaps, there's gaps in your learning, find a resource to sort of build on that, whether it's going to conferences. And there's a lot of things now, I think, because of the pandemic. One sort of positive thing to come from that is that there's lots more things on social media type platforms for learning now. So maybe not the hands-on skills learning side of things, but definitely the more soft skills, which is something we don't always practice, and we definitely need more practice of, really. That'd be my top one. Okay.
Top tip for me is, although you may have a special interest in a particular area, try to stay up to date with everything that's happening across podiatry generally, especially if you are going to go to an area where realistically working in a specialty is not going to work because you're going to be in private practice. And most private practices will be very diverse in terms of who walks through the door at any point in time. So yeah, you still need to stay, and that's where conferences and stuff come into play as well, and are very handy at least Though you have a special interest, it can't be your only interest.
Excellent tip, thank you. Okay, so we've got no questions in the comments, but just got some good some comments. So excellent session. Thanks so much for sharing your knowledge and experiences. So thank you everyone that's come on the call today. So it's been emotional. So session 3 of Let's Talk About Melanin. So we'll get the resources and the links to some of the resources. I will put them all together and I will post it on the Podiatry, Tunprasert website. So you've not had time to put them up on the screen today, but it's been really good. And, you know, thank you all for being involved in this, really. You know, I'm kind of very passionate about it, but also quite emotional about this, because something that was never discussed even 2 years ago. So the fact that we're actually able to have platforms to talk about these things, but also being brave enough to speak about them is really important. I think that, you know, if we don't call things out or don't speak about things, we can't make a change. And sometimes it takes a few brave people to kind of sort of nudge that door open, and then other people will follow. I know a lot of people don't like to always get involved in talking about topics that are difficult. Things about race, colour, so forth as well are difficult, very difficult topics to discuss. But I think you know we're all quite open, and I think I'd encourage other people to be open to discuss these things and just help people learn, because not everyone knows, and if you don't know, you never had exposure or experience, you're never going to know. So you know, be open to learning about things yourself, because we're not experts, even though we have the darker skin tones as well. We really can go on what we see and what we know, and if all we see is ourselves, we can't really judge everybody's skin issues on just our own. So I definitely encourage that. But I think thanks for everyone for coming and being involved today, and hopefully we'll all meet again and do another session another time. And thanks for everybody that's tuned in tonight to listen. So wish you all a good evening, good night, and we'll see you all again soon.
Thank you. Bye.
See you later.